As we talk about that new inflation report, the CPI, it is not uniform from coast to coast, and every different state, every different city has a different real feel effect of inflation. And WalletHub coming out with the list of some of the top 23 major markets across metrics of this consumer price index measuring inflation, cities with the worst inflation problems. And here's the top 5 of this list, a snapshot on how inflation has changed the short term, long term. Seattle, San Diego, both on the West Coast, and it goes back out east, Tampa, Florida, St. Louis, Missouri, and New York City. So obviously interesting to look at how inflation has impacted certain localities more so than others. Let's bring in right now with WalletHub, Chip Lupo. Chip, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And of course, WalletHub coming out with this list, comparing some of these major cities, seeing which one has the worst inflation versus the maybe best inflation. What are your big takeaways? Were you shocked by anything?
I did find it kind of shocking, just the disparity in the metro areas, because what we did is we compared the 23 largest metro areas across 2 key metrics when it comes to the CPI. One is to kind of provide sort of a short-term and a long-term picture, because some areas are currently rebounding or dropping a little bit, and others have made gradual strides or vice versa over the past year. So we try to do a comprehensive snapshot for both long-term and short-term when it comes to CPI.
Yeah, it is so very interesting. You talk about that, maybe the leveling out of sorts. Some cities, some areas that saw significant inflation not as high. Is that something that you kind of notice as well? Certainly a leveling of the tide, at least?
Oh, absolutely. And it's now with a study like this, we ranked the 23 largest metro areas. This is a list in which you don't want to be at the top. So the lower you are on the list, the better off you are. And I'm looking right now at Phoenix, for example, 22 out of 23. They had the lowest decrease over the past year, just 0.20%. Now contrast that to the San Diego area, San Diego, Carlsbad, California, 4% jump from a year ago. So again, this is just a drastic. Again, I was just blown away with just the disparity from just region to region nationwide.
Yeah, that is so very true. And we are actually based in the Phoenix area. So we have seen some of that cooling in terms of inflation. And unfortunately, we were kind of at the forefront of all the inflation at the beginning. So it was kind of interesting to see how the dynamics work.
To mention that, because Phoenix has done a tremendous job of climbing out, because they were among the worst. It was like up to 9% or even almost 10% 3 or 4 years ago. So they've done a tremendous job climbing out of that hole, and a 0.2%. And it's one of 2 areas that had less than 1. Dallas was the other at 0.90% over the last year. So only 2 metro areas with a decrease of less than 1% year over year.
Yeah, that's so very interesting. You talk about some of those being at the end of the list, not necessarily always the case in terms of you wanting to be at the end of the list, but this one is the one you want to be on. I want to ask you, any other similarities? Because we see kind of the West Coast, the top of the list, but then you have Tampa, also number 3 at the top of the list as well. Are there any other similarities, any other correlations that you're picking up on?
I think your very densely populated areas are ranked very high, starting with Boston, LA at 3.2%, New York, New Jersey at 3.2%, Philadelphia at 3%. It just seems the really, really dense urban areas are the ones that are having the hardest trouble of getting out of this. These are year-over-year numbers, so this is a 4% jump for San Diego, 3.5% for Riverside, California, just from a year ago, from the same month, July 2025, a year ago.
Yeah, that is some good information. I think a lot of people in local cities and states want to know it. I want to ask you, because we talked to a reporter from Barron's just a moment ago talking about a potential rate cut coming, and that can impact different things like credit cards and cars and whatnot. In your eyes, do you think a rate cut would impact different cities more, and is there anything you can glean from that?
Well, I think a rate cut would benefit. I think it would benefit pretty much all the areas could benefit because we've been standing pat since December 2024. So this has been a long stretch as I can remember in recent memory that that there's been no action on rate cuts. So now we're talking about an inflation rate that is at 2.7, which is light years removed from where we were 4.5, 5 years ago. Still not at that target rate of 2%. But I think a rate cut could probably bring us to that 2%, and then it's cyclical. Once that inflation rate hits 2, I think, and again, you'll see. I think every metro area will improve, and again, some will likely improve more than others, just based on local economies.
And you mentioned that 2.7%, that being the CPI index. Of course, we're learning about it today. How much do you guys lean on that? How much are you kind of diving into the numbers as well, seeing this to kind of evaluate how these different markets rank?
Well, the CPI, that's the gold standard. This is the benchmark that's used to measure inflation and price changes and consumer spending patterns in urban areas. So this is the gold standard, which is why we do long-term and short-term, just to get a better idea, because some areas that are improving right now are maybe not necessarily where they were a year ago.
And can I ask you, because you rank the top 23 or these 23 kind of areas, if a person is living in a location that isn't one of these areas, you're like, hey, I feel left out. Why do we pick the 23? And is there any indication about other areas, other states or other cities that might have felt a little bit left out during this?
Well, the CPI, it measures spending in urban areas. So this is why it's concentrated to the largest MSAs. Now, you can glean from some of this. For example, let's take a look at, let's see, what's big? Well, Seattle, number one. They are in a world of hurt with a 2.7 increase from a year ago. And in a lot of these metro areas, the state pretty much leans on where the largest metro area goes. It's not quite the same in a state like Florida, which has several different metro areas that probably don't rely on one another. There's no one area like, say, Illinois rises and falls on what Chicago does. Florida doesn't have that because you have so many different metro areas. Now, granted, Tampa's a metro area, and Miami, Orlando, and even some smaller areas like Fort Myers or even Tallahassee. So they're not as reliant on one single metro area, like say Colorado, also struggling year to year. The state pretty much relies on what goes on in Denver to Washington, D.C. area is another example. Houston, that has Texas, has two gigantic metro areas, Houston and Dallas. Now, those are regional in different parts of the state. The eastern part of the state where Houston is would be more reliant on what goes on there economically, where North Texas, where you're going to goes on in their state.
Yeah, that's a very good point, just to showcase and characterizes how different areas, even if they're close in proximity, California being another one, the San Diego, LA area as well, kind of being two separate demographics there, but obviously impacts differing for the different communities. Chip, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Great stuff here on Live Now.
My pleasure, Andy. Anytime.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Great conversation there, really localizing the conversation around inflation, as these were some of the top markets that were impacted: Seattle, San Diego, Tampa, St. Louis, and New York, the cities with the worst inflation problems, as WalletHub compared 23 major metropolitan areas across two key metrics related to the Consumer Price Index. I'm Andy Mack. We're back after this.